You ever wonder why people make such a big deal out of the 15th night of Shaban? Like, what's so special about this night? Some say it's a night of mercy or forgiveness, and then there are those who argue that there's nothing really special about it at all. Are we supposed to stay up all night in worship? Or is this just another case of cultural hype? Well, Shaban itself is actually a pretty important month. It's like the pre-game before Ramadan. The Prophet, peace be upon him, used to fast a lot in this month, way more than in any other month except Ramadan. A lot of scholars argue that the narrations about this night aren't strong enough to make it a big deal. They're either weak, da'if, or disputed. The pious predecessors used to call this the month of the reciters, and there's a reason for that. If Ramadan is the month of the Quran, then Shaban is the warm-up, the pre-season, where people of excellence, those who take their worship seriously, start fasting, reading Quran, and getting into the rhythm before Ramadan even begins. Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, even said she never saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, fast in any month after Ramadan more than he did in Shaban. That tells us something, right? Now, when we talk about this month, the discussion about the 15th night of Shaban always comes up. Is it a special night? Should we be doing something extra? First off, let's not miss the bigger picture. Shaban itself is virtuous. It's a chance to clean our hearts, fix our habits, and set ourselves up for success in Ramadan. It's not about waiting for one specific night to do all that. It's about using the whole month wisely while everyone else is still in cruise control. But here's something even more important. The Prophet, peace be upon him, mentioned that Shaban is when our deeds are raised to Allah. That alone should make us pause. Imagine your record of the past year being presented, every prayer, every sin, every moment of sincerity, every act of kindness, all put forward. Now, what if Allah sees deficiencies in it? What if our deeds aren't even accepted in the first place? The Prophet, peace be upon him, used to fast every Monday and Thursday, and when asked why, he said it was because those were the days when deeds are presented to Allah. He wanted his record to be looked at while he was in a state of fasting. But Allah also says that when two people are holding grudges, their deeds are put on hold until they reconcile. Meaning, there are people whose actions aren't even being considered just because they refuse to let go of bitterness and anger. Shaban, in a way, is our month of accounting. It's our chance to take a hard look at our deeds before they're presented. And look, Allah is always aware of what we do. Every moment is being recorded. Not a word does He utter, but there is a vigilant recorder. Quran 50:18. But just like there are special times for dua, like the last third of the night, there are special times when our deeds are given particular attention. And this is one of those times. You must have heard people say that on the 15th night of Shaban, Allah writes down everything that's going to happen in the next year. Like who's going to live, who's going to die, who's going to get rich, who's going to face hardships. All of it is supposedly decided on this night. This whole debate comes from different narrations about this night, but regardless of whether this night is a big deal or not, the message in that hadith is still powerful. If there's one thing we know for sure, it's that holding on to grudges and bad blood isn't something that Allah likes. If we want to be forgiven, we need to let go of the resentment we carry against others. That's a lesson that applies every day, not just on the 15th of Shaban. Now, in many cultures, this night has turned into a big event. Some people light lamps, prepare special sweets, and even visit graveyards because they believe this is the night when souls return. But where did all of this come from? Did the Prophet, peace be upon him, or his companions ever do any of this? There's no record of them treating this night in a special way, aside from general acts of worship. And we know that if something was really important in Islam, the Prophet, peace be upon him, would have made it clear. One common belief is that on this night, all the deeds of the coming year are written down. But this idea comes from weak hadiths, and what we do know for sure is that our final decree happens on Laylatul Qadr in Ramadan. That's the night the Quran itself says is better than 1,000 months, and that's the night Allah informs the angels of His decree. So, making the 15th of Shaban out to be the night where everything is decided? That's not something we can say with certainty. Scholars have always warned against adding religious practices that the Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't teach. Islam is already complete, and when we start introducing new rituals and making them feel like obligations, we risk doing something that wasn't part of the original message. And let's be real, if this night truly had a guaranteed, specific act of worship attached to it, wouldn't the Prophet himself have told us? Wouldn't the companions have made it a big deal? The fact that they didn't says a lot. So does Allah really decree everything for the year on this night? According to authentic sources, no. The moment when everything is written and decided happens on Laylatul Qadr, not the 15th of Shaban. And while there are hadiths about forgiveness on this night, their authenticity is debated. That doesn't mean you can't make dua or seek forgiveness. It just means we shouldn't turn this night into something more than what it is. And what is it actually? There are hadiths that mention this night, and they do seem to suggest that something significant happens. And this is authentic, acknowledged by many scholars. One of the most well-known narrations comes from Mu'adh ibn Jabal, R.A., where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said Allah looks at his creation on the 15th night of Shaban and forgives all his servants except two, one who attributes partners to Allah and one who harbors enmity against others. Now, if we just look at the meaning of these hadiths, the message is pretty straightforward. Allah's mercy is vast, but there are two things that block a person from it: shirk, associating partners with Allah, and hatred towards others. That's a powerful reminder on its own. Even scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah acknowledge that while the hadiths aren't the strongest, they are still enough to indicate that there might be something special about this night, though not to the extent that people make it out to be today. Others argue that since the Prophet, peace be upon him, didn't give us any specific instructions for this night, we shouldn't treat it as anything more than an ordinary night. Ibn Taymiyyah said that praying on the 15th night of Shaban is fine, but making it a big event in the mosque is an innovation, bid'ah. Some of the early righteous people prayed on this night, but they did it individually or in small groups at home, not as a regular gathering. He was especially against a specific prayer called As-Salah al-Alfiyah, where people pray 100 rak'ahs and recite Surah Al-Ikhlas 1,000 times. He said that praying in a group occasionally is okay, like how the Prophet, peace be upon him, prayed with Ibn Abbas and Hudhaifa. But turning it into a fixed tradition in the mosque, that's not from the Sunnah. Sheikh Omar Suleiman, for example, encourages worship in Shaban in general, especially seeking forgiveness and preparing for Ramadan. Islam QA scholars take a similar stance. According to them, there are no specific acts of worship prescribed for this night, meaning there's no extra prayer, fasting, or gathering that's been legislated in the Sunnah. Of course, worship is always good, but it shouldn't be based on the idea that this night holds a status that isn't clearly proven. So where does that leave us? Well, there's no clear-cut answer. To be on the most safe side, if you want to pray on this night, do it. Do some self-reflection, but don't make a big deal out of it. Now, what practices are there that need to be done? What exactly should we do on the 15th night of Shaban? This night is more about letting go than putting forward. Some people stay up all night praying, and some fast the next day. But what's the right approach? There are no specific acts of worship prescribed for this night in any authentic hadith. The Prophet, peace be upon him, never told us to pray a certain way, recite specific du'as, or fast only on this day. But does that mean we should ignore it completely? Not at all, because while there are no special rituals for this night, good deeds are always encouraged. For example, fasting. The Prophet, peace be upon him, used to fast a lot in Shaban, not just on the 15th, but throughout the month. So, if you're in the habit of fasting or want to follow his example, that's great. But singling out this one day, thinking it's a sunnah to fast only on the 15th, that's not something proven. Then there's night prayer, Qiyam al-Layl. This is something recommended all year round, and there's no harm in praying extra on this night. The key is intention. Are you doing it because you want to get closer to Allah? Great. But are you doing it because you believe there's a guaranteed reward for praying specifically on this night? Well, that part isn't backed by any clear evidence. And of course, there's dua and dhikr, remembering Allah, making sincere supplications, and asking for forgiveness. These things are always beneficial, whether it's the 15th of Shaban or any random Tuesday. The real focus should be on consistency. Islam isn't about doing something big on one night and then forgetting about it the rest of the year. It's about small, continuous acts of worship that actually strengthen our relationship with Allah. The two things you can do to improve your relationship on this night that is authentic and acknowledged by most scholars are important. There is one narration strengthened by multiple sources that many scholars, both classical and contemporary, have accepted. And it revolves around two things that many of us struggle with. What's interesting is that it's not really about what extra you should do on this night, but rather what you should remove from your life. In this narration, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was reported to have said that on the 15th night of Shaban, Allah looks out to his creation and forgives everyone, except for two types of people. One is a disbeliever. The other, someone who carries hatred in their heart. The first one, shirk, is obvious. We don't associate anyone with Allah. No one else deserves worship. No one else can be placed at his level. That's clear. But the second one, that's where it gets real. Holding on to hatred, holding a grudge, letting anger fester so much that it consumes your heart and poisons your deeds. Imagine this. Ramadan opens its doors and you step forward, excited for a fresh start. But then, the gates are closed in front of you. You're alive, but you're not allowed to enter with the full mercy of the month. Why? Because you refuse to let go of something you should have left behind for the sake of Allah. Hatred isn't just something you feel. It grows. It leads to backbiting, then slander, then full-on character assassination. It can start as bitterness and end as cruelty. And once it takes root, it doesn't just harm the person you're mad at, it wrecks you. It turns worship into a going through the motions type of thing, because how can a heart full of anger also be full of sincerity? That's why this purification of the heart has to come first. Think about how we always hear reminders in Ramadan about worshiping like the angels. They don't eat, they don't drink, they exist purely to obey Allah. But you know what else? They love only for Allah's sake, and they hate only for Allah's sake. There's no ego, no personal grudges, no stubbornness. At the end of the day, what really matters is sincerity, not the date on the calendar. The best way to honor this night, or any night, really, is to focus on what truly matters, our connection with Allah. Instead of looking for specific rituals that aren't backed by strong evidence, we should be using this time to prepare for Ramadan. That means checking in with ourselves. How's our salah? Are we consistent with our Quran recitation? Are we holding on to grudges that we should be letting go of? This is the perfect time to seek forgiveness, not just from Allah, but from the people we may have hurt along the way.